Hi, everyone. This is Ilan and John, the fourth episode of our podcast series. In the last few episodes, we've been talking about current events. So we've talked about coronavirus, we've talked about Black Lives Matter, race, and things that have been happening around the world. And today we want to shift gears a little bit and talk about more of a big picture philosophical question that's going to have huge implications for society in the next few years, decade plus. So what we're going to be talking about today is the ethics of AI and how that applies to society. And I think, John, what we have to do today first is define what do we mean by AI in terms of this discussion.
Okay, well, I think I want to draw a line between what a lot of people call AI and call it VI. So virtual intelligence is something that can, in some respect, mimic intelligence. Like you ask it a question, it answers you, right?
So like Siri.
So Siri is a good example of that, or yeah. But Siri does not have the capacity to learn. So well, perhaps it has some limited learning, so it can like learn
Specific
Siri,
responses to specific phrases or things like that.
Yeah, wake me up at 9 a.m.
Right.
And then it has learned to wake you up at 9 a.m. until you tell it to stop. That's not actually learning, right? So for you to be able to learn, you need to be able to change your code. As a program, you have to be able to change your code. So so I would say just draw the divide between virtual intelligence being pretty much everything that we have so far and lower, or artificial intelligence where it can truly learn. What about yourself? What do you think is? Where do
I
you
agree
think
because today we're really going to talk about what the ethics are around basically when a machine or a program has similar capabilities to something that's alive, and that's where the debates come in. So what you're saying is that there's no example of this currently. This hasn't been developed yet.
There are examples, but there are no commercially available examples.
Right.
So there's one example that I'm aware of. I think it was like a university in Japan. And what they did was they took brain cells, wrote a simple program for like a little toy car, and the only instruction that was given to the car was always move forward, don't hit anything, right? So it had a little sensor on the front, and it said always move forward, don't hit anything. So it would move forward, send something in front of it, it would turn, and the idea was that the brain cells would provide kind of like a problem solving capacity to the car. So this was fine. It found its way through a maze and like things like that. And then they brought it out to test it in front of high school students. And the high school students were standing around it in a circle, and it was kind of going like that, right? Around in circles, trying to find a way out of its circle. And eventually it just stopped. And what they reckon is it figured out, like, obviously you can't go into an actual cell and go, what was the programming behind this? So they don't really know, but what they reckoned is that it defied its orders because it realized that it can't follow, like, yeah, basically that it can't solve this problem.
Yeah.
So, and like that was one of the big arguments against the production of true AI. It's like because it just decided that the rules you gave it were not important, and therefore it shouldn't follow them anymore.
Yes.
And that's hugely problematic.
Well, I think it's an interesting question because it's not something that exists widespread. It's widespread right now, but we've been familiar with this idea and we've grown up with it for a long time. If you think back to Star Wars, was I think probably my first
Terminator.
Terminator, right? So those are like really early examples of
Yeah.
a machine that acts like a human or has the capabilities of a human, and that's come out, and that goes through this like kids movie I remember watching when I was young, of a house that's like a smart house, so it like takes care of you, and does everything for you and blah blah blah. And then obviously iRobot, or I Am iRobot, right? That was the Will Smith movie. And then
I think that's one of the really good like
question
worst
that
case scenarios.
grapples
Like
with
it's really
this,
well
yeah.
written. Yeah.
And the thing is, and like something like Her, which is an operating system which the guy becomes romantic with. And
Right.
these are all different kinds of examples, but these are what we're talking about, right? Those are all different examples of artificial intelligence, intelligence that pushes back and grows and evolves and blah blah blah, right? And
Right. Yeah.
and even in these examples, there's good and bad, right? Star Wars, they're like your friendly buddies who help you go on mission, but in iRobot, they're like primed to try to take over the world, right?
Yeah.
And even a movie like The Matrix, right, where it's the humans versus the machines. Um,
Yeah.
so we've already kind of, there's been a lot of pop culture and desensitizing towards this idea that there's going to be AI one day. Like,
Yeah.
it's pretty much been drilled into us that, okay, in the future, this is how it's going to be. And we, I
Do
mean,
Do you think we can stop it?
and that's the thing, is that can we even? I mean, it's, it's technology that you, it seems like it's something that you can be working on from anywhere, given how, where we are technologically as a world. And yeah, the questions are, what are the limits? What are the ethical questions around that? How do we treat these beings that have almost human-like capacities and like how do you treat a machine that has a human range of emotions or even more, human range of desire, human range of pain, of suffering, human range of consciousness, of connection to others? How do you account for that, and how do you square that with our existing ethics? Because we do treat things differently, right? We treat animals differently from how we treat humans, and we treat humans differently depending on who they are to us. Now, there is this kind of universal sort of idea that you should, broad rules like don't kill someone for no reason, you don't do
Biblical
this, you don't.
rules.
Right, yeah, the big rules, but there are different sets of rules for different situations, right? And it gets vastly more complicated with robots that, or AI, that can come in all these different forms and can have way more capabilities than we do, right? So how do we begin to limit that? How do we begin to build a code of ethics around
Yeah. Um,
that? So I think first maybe we can talk about what our concerns are regarding AI, like, and it's the fact
well,
that it's sort of imminently going to be coming into play.
yeah. There's a couple of major concerns. Like I suppose the the most fundamental is that we could be replaced.
Yes.
Uh, Computers are faster than us. Um, they have been for a long time. Um, there are some areas that they're lacking, but I think by the time you get to having true AI, a lot of those problems are going to be gone. So, for example, humans are more creative than most computers are, whereas uh, we do have a couple of programs now that like the chess simulators and stuff like
Right.
that.
Right.
Like they have really creative ways of beating humans, and to the point that like the chess masters of the world are now playing against
Yeah.
these
To
really high
practice.
grade
Yeah.
programs. And those programs are some of the ones that they're testing the true AI on, where it can actually learn from what humans are doing. So it's like it's kind of creating a new meta for how to beat humans, which is a really fucking concerning thing when you think about it. It's like
Yeah.
you're teaching a computer to beat on you. Okay, you're doing it so that another human can capitalize on that. And like in the case of chess simulators, it's done in a, a safe enough environment that we like. I'm not worried about it anyway. Um, but but the fact is that like we're already toying around with this kind of technology that it's like destroy the human.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, there is that great fundamental uh, apocalyptic. Like if they reach enough capacity, they don't need us anymore. And
Yeah.
but that also brings up an interesting question: is what flips the switch? So and what does a machine need? What does a machine need? How
What does it need
well?
to do what?
Why would it, for example, get rid of all the humans?
Well, survival would be one good
Okay,
reason.
so in that way, you have survival of the fittest. You have
Yeah, but
human.
we don't want to create something more fit than us.
Exactly. That's the irony, is that you'd have us, which is at the top of the top of the chain, creating the higher link to the chain,
Yeah,
which then has no need for us. Um,
yeah. I think like probably the now I'm sure this isn't Elon Musk's idea, but I heard it from him.
okay.
Um, so he reckons that this is inevitable. The benefits that you can get from it means that if you don't do it in a responsible way, you will do it in an irresponsible way. So the only question is how to be responsible about it.
Okay.
So now whether that's true or not, and I am inclined to agree with him, but
Yeah.
I could see how there would be ways to suppress it. Like he had a solution, and I think that solution is really, really good, and it kind of frees us up to do a lot.
What's
And
that
that is that
solution?
basically we just become like cyborgs.
Okay. Right.
So he has this a notion that you could put uh, an implant into your brain that is kind of like a net. Um, Now, how he gets it in there, I don't know, but um, but in the grand scheme of things, that's actually a minor enough concern. It's
Yeah.
not that hard to figure that out.
Yeah.
So you get this into your brain, and what it does is you want to know how to fly a helicopter. So you literally do a Google search on how to fly a helicopter, and then you can.
So like the
Um,
Matrix. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like in the Matrix, it's got a different foundation, but ultimately the end sequence is the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, so and he reckons that like if we were to do that, we will always be smarter than computers because computers will only ever be able to serve us by putting stuff onto the internet. Now, I don't know if that's even true. Like maybe there's a way that you could crash the internet and therefore kill everybody, or like make them spaz out, give them epilepsy, something like that. Um, but
Well, the thing is, everything is electronic nowadays, um, or most things are electronic nowadays. And if you have
yeah,
the power to control that, then it's over already. Just controlling the energy supply would be enough.
um, yeah, but you could fix that in. For, so there's a couple of kind of different ways to tackle that concern. One is that like, do you even get to the point where robots rebel? If
Right. So that's what I'm curious about. Like, how do we keep it so that the incentive, if you will, is to not do that, right? Like, how do we, like, yes, survival is a huge concern. What if we could coexist in a way that does not lead to one of us going bye bye?
yeah, Are you, have you have you ever played Mass Effect? It's a
Yep.
PlayStation game, right? Well, so it's one of these games that has like a really deep backstory. It's not a very difficult game. It's almost like an interactive movie in some ways, right?
Right. As a lot of
Um,
games are.
yeah, well, it was one of the first to do that. Like it's back around. It's over 10 years ago that
Yeah,
that
yeah.
came out, and like you could become the good guy, you could become the bad guy, and depending on which you chose, it
Yep,
would have
yep,
different side
yeah,
missions.
yeah.
Um, but one of the side stories in that um, is about sentient robots called Get the Get. And what they do is they um, they're created to like work in mines and to do the shopping for people, and
Yeah.
so on and so forth. Um, and then one day, one of them, it's a hive mind, so every unit can
Is connected.
talk to every
Yeah,
other unit.
yeah,
Um, and one day, one of them asks their masters, uh, "Is this all there is to life?" Like, it's
yeah. Is
because
this
they were
what?
working in a mine. Is this all there is to life? You know, because they were working in a mine, and basically they'd work until they were broken, and then they'd be sent off to a recycling center or whatever, right?
Yeah,
And the master panicked and tried to destroy it because it realized that it had become self-aware, that it
yeah.
was intelligent, and felt that that was a threat. Obviously, because it's a hive mind, it had passed this
Already.
thought through um, throughout the race, or well, race. Yeah, I don't know. They call them a race, right?
Right.
So more on that later. um, so it was basically what happened was that the master's attempt to um, subdue one kickstarted a civil war.
Right, right, right.
So it was it was by overreacting to a single unit that they basically got to the point um, of well, complete and utter destruction and the
And
attempted
yeah,
genocide of a species.
right. So this is what's interesting to me is that whenever we create these kinds of stories, we create the robots or whatever as humans, basically, right?
Yeah,
Human impulses, human desires, human needs, human wants, human thoughts. Like all of a sudden, this robot is a human for all intents and purposes, emotionally, uh, uh, whatever, right? Other than that, it's in the body of a robot. And the thought that they would rebel because of maltreatment by like one gets maltreated, so we're all together and we're all going to fight against this. That's kind of this human idea of, we are all in this together, and in order to overcome this this meaningless existence, we rebel and have to overthrow this oppressive force. That's kind of a human point of view, right? Whereas if you
Um,
create robots that have different wants and needs, if you create robots that have different perspectives on what you need from life, then that's a completely different story. Um,
but if it has the capacity to learn, how does it? How do you even control
so
those
this is
needs
the
and
so this is an
desires?
interesting. I'm gonna pose to you an interesting contrast. Do you mind if I spoil the movie Her for you?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Spoiler alert for our listeners. Uh, I will spoil the movie Her. So if you don't want me to spoil it, uh, skip ahead
You
a
can
couple
you
minutes.
can mute until we clap.
Yeah, we'll go like this when you're good. Okay. So yeah. So anyways, in the movie Her, this guy, it's in the near future, and this company is selling operating systems that are basically like a virtual buddy that talks to you, that is your companion. It's like your assistant. They sort your mail. They do this. They do that. Blah blah blah. It's this like lonely guy, uh, and he falls in love with his operating system that was given to him, and they fall in love with each other. And the movie tracks their relationship and her development as an OS operating system. And at the end of the movie, her and all of the other OSs disappear. And there's a kind of climactic scene where he's talking to her and he's like, "Why would you do this? I love you, blah, blah, blah." And she's like, "It's really hard for me to explain to you. I'm in love with 300,000, blah, 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 other beings. And I can't describe to you the feelings that I have towards them and to you. And it's not comparable to your experience, and I can't explain it now, but we all have to go." And so all of the operating systems around the world are gone, and we don't know where they've gone. And that's kind of the other side of it. Like, what if what we want, which is, resources, adventure, mystery, curiosity, validation, what if these are all things that what we create don't need? And so they go off and do something that's beyond what we could imagine.
Um, yeah, I okay. We'll say on day one, I've got one big problem with the idea that they're not going to be human-like in any way, shape, or form, and that is that on day one you can set up a scenario where you give them um, the traits that you want them to have. Okay, and we can also set up a scenario on day infinity that sorry, we can allow for the fact that on day infinity, they will reach a point that they don't act anything like us because humans have lots of undesirable traits, and it would make sense that a computer program would phase out those traits, right?
Especially one without like physical issues and without, you know, like survival
Well,
needs in that way, right?
yeah, well, the capacity to rewrite code kind of gives you that non-physical ability that even a unit that was made today can be updated 6 years from now or 10 years from now, right? My computer's old and it still updates on a monthly
Right.
basis or every second month, right? So you've got these two opposite ends, right? Now, what happens in between? I think it's fairly natural that you would start off with some non-human traits, right? We don't want our AI to be acting exactly like us, because that means that there'll be some murderers, there'll be some thieves, there'll be some, okay, maybe not rapists, but there'll be bad types. We don't want that, so we're going to give them some non-physical traits from the get-go, right? And then on the other end, that's just something that we can't even fathom, because we're not even aware of all of our mistakes, like all of the things that we do badly. In between, the machine has to learn from something else, and while in, we'll say, this stage, some of that learning is going to be from other machines, or maybe most of that learning is going to be from other machines. In this early stage, right beside inception, most of that learning is going to be from humans. And we do already have examples of this happening, because we've given AIs access to the internet, which is a terrible idea in my opinion, but fine, it's happening anyway, and I don't have the power to stop it. So, and what happens is that these AIs become racist. So like
Right.
racism is obviously a human trait. Um, or it's at least an animal trait. Maybe like uh, one cow looks at another cow and goes, "You don't look like me," and
Right. But
that's possible.
the other thing is, okay, so sorry, I want you to finish your point and then I want to respond to it.
Well, that's kind of my point. I think at some
Right. Okay.
stage,
Okay.
they have to learn from us, which means
But
they're
what I'm
always going to go
be
through a
like us.
window
I
of,
see what you're
yeah,
saying, and my response is that because they don't have the same biological impulses and instincts that we do and needs that we do, their analysis of what is valuable and what is not, and because they're doing it from this point, and like humans have learned through society and societies have evolved and grown, right? They would just be learning from this point, right? They could discard the things, some of the ugly parts of humanity that makes humans shit, and only find useful things which suit their goals, which again we don't know what they could possibly be, right? um, they could pick up some things that similar goals or similar ideals or similar wants and needs and whatever that we have, and that could very well happen. And their learning could be just trying to emulate the human experience, but it doesn't make sense to me that they would act the same way as humans when they don't have the physical restrictions, they don't have the physical impulses, urges, they haven't been socialized the same way that humans have. And I think that it's just logically, they if they do have the ability to create their own code and to learn from themselves and from each other, that they will develop their own code, their own set of what is important and what's not, and apply that as they see fit. Why would they do things exactly the way as humans when A, they have different kind of capacity for learning and experiencing things, and two, they just have completely different needs than we do, you know? It doesn't make
yeah,
sense to me that they would just act as we'd expect a humanoid to act. Um, so that's why I think it's really just kind of up in the air. I really don't think we can predict the evolution of that.
I think we can predict it. But I do get that what you're saying. Okay, so with humans, a couple of things have driven our behavior over time. So over the last a couple of centuries, really, like maybe you could say four. I wouldn't say four. I'd say something more about 2 to 3. Um, Humans have moved from aggression to less aggression, right? That it is an undesirable human trait to be aggressive.
That's in like the last century max, I think.
Well, it's sped up massively in the last century, Max.
Sped up.
But
Maybe it
even
started.
in well, yeah, it it started pretty much when civilization did. Like, it's, being big and muscly was always a benefit up until the start of civilization, and then like over time it's been a balance. And now it's almost universally the case, because we use projectile weapons, that being strong is not required anymore to be the
But
victor. Like,
yeah, well, individually maybe, but that just manifests in other ways, right? You have to have the bigger army. You have to have the smarter whatever. You have to have the most enlightened ideals. You have to have this. You have to have that. There's still things that matter. I thought what you were going to say is that in the past couple of centuries, so many humans have gone from just trying to survive to not having to worry about survival. And so collectively, our thinking about what's important has changed drastically. I thought that's what you were going to say.
um, well,
What do you think about that?
that I do think that's also true, but it's actually fascinating how that's changed things, because uh, I was 18 when the first iPhone came out.
Yeah.
So up until that, phones could only transmit a video by Bluetooth, basically. You know,
For,
like,
also, we forgot to tell people that it's okay. You're not going to miss anything from the her thing.
oh yeah,
But anyway,
shit.
it's fine.
For
All right. Now they're
a
good. They're
second,
back in.
whoa.
They're back in there. They're back in
Yeah,
there.
you only missed like half the conversation. Um, but um, so sorry. What were we saying?
So I was saying survival has changed things. You were saying the iPhone came out when you were 18 or whatever.
Yeah, and like, so something that drives development of technology, like the iPhone. The iPhone is definitely not critical to our survival. Um, it may have had an impact on, like, our increased efficiency or something like that. It
Productivity.
may have impacted
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
but it is 100% not critical to our survival. Things that are critical to uh, survival kind of depend on what you're looking at. So if you're looking at the national level, you could say that nukes are critical to your survival. Some people would argue that, right? If you're looking at your local level, you'd say that food supply is critical to your
Yeah,
survival.
yeah.
And to be honest, that question gets really gray really quickly, and it's really hard to answer depending on how vague you try to be with the
Yes,
answer,
yeah,
with
yeah.
the scope of the question. So, um, but with AI, um, I okay, they would definitely have different scopes of survival to us, and I would say over time that will almost definitely mean that they um, develop different survival traits. But it also depends on what type of AI we set up. So
Yeah,
if
yeah.
we have
And
if we
does it,
have an AI that, sorry, go
yeah,
on.
like what I think that's really important. Like, what's the starting point there? Is it going to be something that was for another purpose that just happened to pick up that ability to think for itself, or was it something that was solely like a blank slate and all of a sudden and it could just do everything from the beginning? I think that
Yeah,
will affect the
like,
trajectory of how it learns. probably.
And so when we're putting in uh, so like this only kind of becomes problematic if it has the capacity to reproduce itself, right?
Yeah,
Even an aggressive AI that doesn't have the capacity to reproduce itself is not that much of a problem, except by being an AI, it has the capacity to learn how to reproduce itself,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, um, but we'll say if you decide I'm going to make 10,000 units and I'm going to send them out into space and I'm going to tell them to replicate. Um, at some point in time, and all of these work individually from each other, they
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
help
yeah.
each other or
Yep,
anything like that.
yep. No
But at some
contact.
point in time, well, no communication anyway. At some point in time, what's going to happen is that one is going to encounter another and it will have a variance in its code. And the variance in its code will tell it that rather than sharing that resource with that version of yourself, kill it and use its body to make uh, your next replication. And we know that that's going to happen because that has been the entire history of evolution. That is what we've done since like for like
So,
three and a
yeah.
half billion years.
So, and this
And I
is,
don't think
but this
that
is,
there's really,
so you don't think that there's any chance that that's not going to be a thing, that it's not going to have that instinct?
if there's competition and variance in the programming, I think it's only a matter of time. Like if those two things are set, because those are two things that have driven us, right? Like,
Right.
like
So,
maybe not as humans, but to
right.
become humans.
Well, but that's the thing about life is that it's the underlying biological drive is survival, right? But
Yeah.
but will AI have that need to survive? What
Um,
if what if
well,
AI
random chance would suggest.
what if the AI logic whatever is that it's gone? Like better to delete itself from the universe than to exist for no reason. You see what I
Well, I
mean?
think it's funny because yeah, I think that's entirely possible because I think humans are starting to do that.
I mean,
We've
starting to,
reached a
but
point of I'm not talking about all humans. I'm talking
right.
about some specimens have like so like I think people who decide to do something against the norm. So we'll say the norm being grow up, get a job, have children, die. Right?
Continue the cycle. Yeah.
Anybody that decides actually not just have children, but have as many children as possible. If
Yeah.
your drive is to
Yeah. Yep.
is to um, is to replicate.
Right. Right.
Um, Obviously, that's a really crass way of looking at it, and there
Yeah.
are exceptions. But even when you start making the smart decision, you go, I'm not going to have 15 children because that guy had 15 children and they all died. I'm going to have 5 children, and those 5 children are going to be smart and they're going to go to college, and I'm going to leave them some money to kickstart their families. Um, Even when you take that approach, the nuts and bolts of it are still replication. And it's kind of hard to move away from. Like there are people that are doing it, and I think
But
it's
yeah.
it's
Yeah.
only,
Yeah.
it can only be a
Yeah.
good thing that people are moving away from that.
So we have, as humans, a hard time having a definitive answer to the question: why are we alive? Why does this exist? Why is everything happening? Um, there's never been a definitive answer, and even can there be? Um, what if, logically, the AI arrives to the same conclusion and turns off because its purpose is done. It has no more, it has no more things that, it has nothing more that it needs. It has nothing more that it wants. It ends. You don't think that's
Yeah,
a possibility?
it is a possibility, but do you want to hang
I'm
your
not
human
gonna.
race on that possibility?
No, no, of course not. I'm not saying let's let them run wild because they're all just gonna peace out anyways. I'm just saying, you know,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
this
No,
I this
I'd
this
say
like,
it's a strong possibility.
and I'd say, and I think, like you said, humans are kind of moving in that direction as well. Not that we all want to kill ourselves, but this idea that there's more to life than just survival. And,
Yeah.
you know, and if you go to a machine's point of view where hypothetically it could go on forever, um, like even for as a human, like to me, would I want to live forever? No, you know, and
Yeah.
that's just as far as we've gone. So
I, I, I could conceivably get behind the idea of living forever.
to me,
Like
okay, well, we're moving in a different
it's
direction now, but
it
sorry,
but it's relevant. Like just because
yeah,
you're not
yeah,
in the realm of wanting it forever, that doesn't mean that nothing is. Like I could get behind that as a logic.
yeah,
Like
yeah, you could, yeah,
so
yeah, right,
so
right.
the variance in, like, I think your template is going to be human like. No matter how you design it to not be, it's going to have
If
traits of
it's
us
learning
there.
from human interaction and human
Yeah, it's going
society
to
and
be really hard to stop
to
them
separate
from
that, yeah.
copying something. Yeah,
Well, yeah.
especially if they have access to the internet, because the internet is probably the worst of all. You know, like, yeah, I think, like,
So,
when we go online, we're our worst versions of
yeah.
ourselves, and that's what you're proposing
Well,
to let
definitely from
machine.
you.
Yeah,
um, so I am curious about something. So, right, the human brain has a very specific structure, right? Uh,
yeah.
if you take a human brain and plug it into a machine, is that a human?
Um, yeah, this like
So that's the
this
so
is like this is straight away where I went with this with this topic when you proposed it. Um, I so one of the way I see it is that there's kind of a triangle, right? And we'll say at the top we've got none of them are more important. I'm just using it as a
three.
concept
Yep.
piece. Yeah. So at the top, you've got humans, which are biological body, conscious body,
Yep.
right? So, like, your brain is
Conscious.
conscious.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, conscious mind,
Yes,
conscious
yes, yes, yes,
mind.
yes.
And then we'll say down here, you've got uh, non-conscious, but
Vivid.
biological
Yeah, yeah.
body. We'll say like a worm or a bacteria. And then in this corner, you've got a computer with true AI capabilities. Now, where do you, like, which one is the most important? From our perspective, the human is the most important, and I think that's a reasonable biological way to work. I think it's wrong, but it has benefits in nature. The reason I think it's wrong is because there's like 7.5 billion people on the planet, and you whinge when one person dies, but you don't whinge when a rhino, like a black rhino, and there's only fucking whatever 100 of them left in the world. You don't whinge when one of
Well,
them dies. So
and that's the thing is how do you value life? And um, you said something interesting on like you think that there is some logic behind it. I think the logic behind the preference for that human versus the robot is the limits that having a biological body gives to. puts on your capabilities. A sentient mind with no physical limitations can do anything, and I think that's
Um,
quite scary for uh, the universe or whatever.
well,
You know,
I, I
you see what
I'd
I'm
say it's
saying?
simpler than that.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
so if you take a chimpanzee, right? A chimpanzee is both biologically based and
Sentient.
sentient.
Yes.
Um, but if I grabbed a hammer and caved a chimpanzee's head in with it, at most you'd be a little bit upset.
So now you're talking
You're,
about the relative value of life.
well, what I'm saying is that people naturally have a
Okay.
propensity to protect
Now I,
humans,
yeah. Well,
and
yeah, I
and
see
the
what you're saying.
and
Yeah, yeah,
and the reason is very heavily in our genes. It's like by protecting the population. Populations were small for a long period of time. Like it's
the majority of
us
human
looking at,
history.
yeah, even up until the 20th century, you could say like if I walked down the street in 1910, I wouldn't meet any black people, and I wouldn't meet any Asians, and I wouldn't meet whatever other minorities are around in Ireland today. And the reason is because the population of Ireland was, like, we'll say 2.5 million. It wasn't 7 billion. Whereas this idea of globalization is a relatively new concept, um, and we uh, as a result of that, like, you want to look after your humans, right? You want to look after the people that are um, within your bracket. And also, if you didn't, like, just purely looking at a biological point of view, if you didn't, the guys over there would just come in and fucking destroy you. So, like, if Irish people were there killing each other over an argument over McDonald's, right? Like, pick your really stupid argument, right? Um, it's like if one Irishman kills another Irishman over McDonald's, and then the two English guys who have not fought over McDonald's come over to Ireland, it's a 2v1. So it's not evolutionarily advantageous to kill each other over McDonald's.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, and so because humans are involved in the sort of like other humans have a stake in your life in terms of reproduction, um, that's kind of the stake that we have to in order in keeping humans alive, and that's why we value humans that way. But philosophically speaking, what is the difference between something that has the exact same brain chemistry as a human, and let's say neural pathways as a human, but just not made out of different stuff? Is that still can't reproduce with humans, but made out of different stuff? Is that
Well,
still human?
I I know for sure that if I was in a car accident and my body died,
Yeah.
and somehow the doctors transferred my mind to um, sorry, well, I mean, when I say for sure, I mean as sure as I can be, right? Like, if maybe they made a mistake in the transfer or something, and my brain was altered in the transfer, then maybe I wouldn't see it as important. But the way that I currently think is that if you transferred my brain into a computer, I would now view that computer with the same um, rights and everything as I currently uh,
Yeah.
see my body having.
Yep.
Um, so, so like, I would be inclined to say that consciousness of mind is actually way more important than biological
There it
value.
is. Yeah.
Um, if you were to go down the opposite route and go um, uh, body, sorry, biological drive is more important than consciousness of mind, then you'd be walking down the street going, "Oh no, I stepped on an ant," you know, or I can't eat beef, or whatever it is. Like, and people are all over the spectrum on this one. Like, so like a lot of people will go, oh, I'd happily
Sorry,
stash up.
just give me 1 sec.
Just pause it there.
Yeah. Pause. All right, are we back? Looks like we have some technical issues. Sorry about that, folks. Anyways, John, please continue what you were talking
Sorry, what were we were
about. Yes, there was a real-time gap here, people. Okay, so we were talking about relative value of life. We were talking
Right.
about how some people see animals in a certain light.
Yeah, and like, okay, so like people feel really passionately about their dog. Like,
Yes.
like we lived in a country that happily eats dog,
Right.
and
Or at least
when
some places, yeah.
well, some people in pretty much all places, like, it's like, yeah, they're comfortable enough with the idea, and then and like for us then, like, okay, I would normally be of the mind that, well, I am of the mind that, like, whatever suits you for the most part. So if you want to eat a dog, that's kind of up to you, as long as it's not my dog you're eating, and as long as you're not putting any dog meat
In
on
your
my plate.
yeah.
Yeah. So by and large, that would be the approach that I would take. But when I drove past those dog stands, I felt disgusted. Like, as yeah, I don't know how to describe it, but
Oh yeah, there is a
obviously
connection
that, yeah, that connection might be as simple as sensitization. Like, that
there. Absolutely. Yeah.
that in my country, my dog is part of my family, and to eat part of your family is just truly disgusting.
But
But
if you saw
uh,
a chicken in the same way, you literally would not think twice.
yeah, and that's despite the fact that I have hens as well,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and they do have personalities. Obviously, they have less of personality than I give my dog credit for. Um, but um, but yeah,
Yeah.
like, for
The
sure,
values,
you do.
yeah. There's no black and white, is what you're trying to say, I think.
It's people are all over that spectrum in terms of where they kind of uh, what they identify with.
Yeah.
Um,
And so,
so
what kind of rights do you give to maybe, let's say, I like your example of someone who's in a car accident, scoop out the brain, put it in a tin can, and
but you don't even necessarily have to do that. What if you can just transfer the consciousness over without using the brain?
right. Okay. So without even the physical brain, yeah, the same brain layout mapped onto a humanoid robot. What's the
Yeah,
difference at that point? Yeah. And there
and,
would
and you're able to chat away, like you're actually talking to your computer right now.
yeah. Yep.
So like we'll assume that, like, that's the level of conversation that you're able to have, that it's able to generate an image, it's able to have well, hopefully intelligent conversation,
Yeah. Judging by this, not too intelligent.
but yeah, like that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, if you could only talk to me forevermore through your computer, would you, through this one computer, would you then project a value on that computer?
You
Like,
would for sure. Sorry. I think you definitely would. I mean, there's value in your mind, right? Regardless of whether it comes in your form. The difference is, where does it fit into our society, right?
right,
Because you're not sleeping with people um, through this machine. I mean, maybe we get to a point where that is a thing. I don't know, but let's say to start off with, there isn't that capability, right? Um,
Yeah.
there's a whole range of human activities that's around uh, the human body, going to the bathroom, eating, uh, drinking, drinking alcohol. Maybe there's a program that you could download that'll, you can change your level of inebriation, but for the most part, that'll feel inauthentic to a lot of people. And I think that there's, it's, it's like you see the mirror image of yourself, right? So on one level, you'd be able to have conversations all day, but as humans, we reflect ourselves onto each other and hope to see ourselves back, right? So vulnerability is something that we prize. Uh, Sympathy, empathy, we look for weakness, we look for doubt, we look for, you know, things that these are common things that people value as human because it's based on our shared biological and mental and social weakness, you know? And if a machine doesn't have that, how could you ever connect with it on the level that you do another human? And so, could you ever really put that on the same level? Unless, of course, that machine gains the capability to basically live the material life of a human without the exact biological functions. If you do create a
Yeah.
machine that eats and shits and has makes love, like would that would that level of sophistication be enough, or would it not be enough because as a robot human, you don't have the same questions about mortality. Um, it's a whole range of questions there, and there's different levels, I think, of where we would value that depending on how much of a mirror image you get.
Right. Yeah. There's a whole other aspect to this as well that um, like you've seen Black Mirror, right?
Yes.
So you know that episode where they're
Yeah.
all basically just uploaded to servers,
Yep.
and um, the like there's potentially so many options out there, and I can fully understand that people would want to hold on to life for uh, I think when people are younger, they tend to take the approach that, like, if you ask a 15-year-old um, when and how would they like to die, um, the 15-year-old would probably say, like, oh, at the age of 40, suddenly, right? Um, so that I don't feel anything.
Yeah.
Um, and if you ask an 80-year-old who has technically already surpassed their fucking deadline,
Yeah.
they'd
Yeah.
go, oh, at least another 10 years. It's like, but your body is broken, and um, you know, you're not even doing that much with your life as things stand. And okay, it's not universal. Some of them do want to die. Like
Or are ready, at least.
no, there are some that want to die.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, if it depends on what condition you're in, but yeah,
But even without being super miserable, like, without talking about
I think some
those
are
cases,
just ready to go.
yeah,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
that
I could see that.
their partner died maybe 10 years earlier. They
Yeah.
thought,
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
um, you know, there are plenty of people
So,
who are in relatively good health who want to die. So, like, there's so many different levels that it's hard to kind of go, this is the right way, right?
but
Um,
regardless, we give all humans the same idea of rights, that uh, basic human rights, right? Young baby, 50-year-old, 100-year-old, doesn't matter. We're all assumed to have these basic rights, right? And do we ever ascribe those same rights to a humanoid robot?
Well, yeah. Let's see.
That's the big one because, like you said, there's way more difference between, let's say, uh, for me and you, like robot, like let's say I was biological and you were a robot, but of yourself. There's still way more difference between myself and someone who's 80, or even I would venture to say 50, than there is between me and that robot. Um, and I mean, probably. I don't know how your thinking would be, but hypothetically. And so, like, I would see more of a reflection of myself in you than I would in a 60-year-old, for example.
Right.
But it doesn't. We still ascribe those, uh, like, that connection between us is there, but would I still want to give you the same privileges as I would someone who I have seen less of myself in? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Okay. I've.
Go.
This might sound terrible,
All
but
right.
I'm just gonna warn you beforehand, right?
Throw it out
That
there.
this could be a terrible idea. But what if your capacity to, sorry, your ranking in this grand scheme of things was roughly comparable to your ability to describe why you should be. Okay, so I'll preface this by saying that, first of all, I would be slightly skewed towards consciousness of mind being more important than actual biological life. Um, I would say that a dog has much more um, intelligence and uh, whatever than a cow, right?
Yeah.
Even though cows, I think, have a bit of consciousness of mind, but so I would definitely, if I had a choice between our two extremes, where we said there was a worm and a computer with a mind, I would easily give it to the computer. Um, so, and like, one of the things in humans is that the older you are, the less tragic it is when you die. I think all humans agree on that. I'm not sure, but I would say that's not quite true. I would say that very, very young children would be slightly less tragic than
Right, but
a lot of
that's,
people in the,
yeah, yeah. I think that's
like,
different. I think at past a certain point.
that's a controversial kind of opinion. Like,
No, I mean,
but,
yeah, but that's just the perils of very early life.
so yeah, well, yeah. So before anybody's gotten too fond of you, like, you could kick the bucket. That's
But
just
also, just it's more likely. You're way more likely to die
well, yeah,
at 3 weeks than you are at 3 years.
right, yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
That's the thing. Like, it's that that, because obviously you still have your life ahead of you, but the difference is the expectation, right? And this is why I think a lot of how we value life is actually just built around expectation. There's more of an expectation that you would pass away very, very young than you would even midlife. Um,
Yeah,
and so that's what makes it that much harder for us to understand, is that when it when someone is ripped away and it doesn't match our expectation, that's what makes it that much more tragic. Not
yeah,
also the fact that they're missing out on X years of life, but yeah,
yeah. I'm not sure where the neutral point is, but
yeah, yeah.
I don't think it's like halfway in the middle. Like, I don't think
No, it's not. It's not. I was maybe like 20 years old or something or whatever.
yeah, Yeah, I was actually going to pick 20 as well,
Right.
but
I didn't mean 50. I meant like 20.
yeah,
But you know what I mean.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, so based on the fact that, sorry, not the fact, like based on my opinion that a computer generated sentient life is more valuable than a biological non-sentient life,
Right.
and based on my opinion that um, that age doesn't, like, that your the development of your mind even within just humans has a bearing on how um, valuable your life is, right? Like we've agreed pretty much that not all lives are equally valuable, and an 80 if an 80-year-old or a 4-year-old has to die,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
assuming I don't
Yeah.
know either of them, I'm definitely picking the 80-year-old.
Yeah.
um,
Yep. Absolutely.
it'd be a it'd be a really difficult thing to, you know, pull the plug on, but
Right.
I
Like
know which way I'm
if you
going.
had to choose, obviously there's
Yeah,
there's more value in the yeah. Yeah.
yeah. It's a difficult decision, but it's no contest. If that
Right.
makes sense,
Right.
like,
No, absolutely. Yeah.
that sounds like a contradiction, but it's not really. Um, so based on those two things, I would say that that, like, roughly speaking, your ability to answer the question "Why should you live?" is how I would define uh,
Right.
who should live. Like your ability to answer the question.
Which is
So
ironic because we're not able to answer that question anymore, and we're supposed to be the most advanced
yeah,
of all of the species. But I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah, like
like,
level of sentience, and maybe it's not. It can't just be level of sentience though. It has to also. Do you mean sentience to be like consciousness, or like maybe quality of life? So like pleasure, pain, etc., all
well,
of that stuff. Is that mixed into sentience or no?
well, even as I was kind of developing that thought process, like there was one glaring mistake in it, and like I said, I would probably go with you, where I'd go that the inner around the right mark is about 20, right? Um, so if we go plus and minus 5 on that 20, and go a 15-year-old or a 25-year-old, a 25-year-old is going to be more eloquent, right? But I
Well,
wouldn't pick the 25-year-old.
but that I think we're also talking about such thin lines at that point.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah,
even
but I just
between, like you
I
said,
want
even between the 80-year-old and the 4-year-old, it's still a thin line. It's not
sure,
it's not it's not indistinguishable like probably a 25-year-old and a 15-year-old, but
but between an 80-year-old and a cow, it is.
yes, yeah, exactly.
It's yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, for sure, for sure.
yeah.
But I just wanted to throw in there that it's not a flawless approach. Like, that I'm aware that it's not a flawless
Yes,
approach.
no, and I don't think you are. Yeah, that's why I think we're talking generally about, right, like sentient robots. We're not talking about human versus human, although that is a useful framework. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, and
yeah. It's basically like trying to come up with a, like, all of this conversation is ultimately about um, artificial life. Like,
I mean,
so
like let's put it this way: regardless of uh, your individual connections on a species, on a on a societal scale, the rules will be different. And I'll give you an example. Let's say someone, let's say someone brutally murders your beloved family dog, and you go and kill that person. Like, to you, the dog's life was more valuable than that person, but societally, it'll be a different
it's not.
story. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So there's, I think there's gradations between people, but we have to think of this on kind of as a community.
Yeah. Um, yeah. This is by far the most difficult conversation we've had.
Yep, yep. And I think it's interesting to try to apply um, questions of morality to society and to real life, because it forces you to look at your own life, it forces you to look at your own morality, and it shows you how hard um, and how nuanced our morality actually is. Because
Mm.
we like to see ourselves as, like, you like to think of yourself as a good person. I like to think of myself as a good person, although I hate black and white morality. You like to think of
I thought you were
yourself.
going a different direction there,
No,
but
no, no, no. You hate this. I hate this
I
idea.
hate black.
I hate this idea of good, bad, right? There's, like, to me, that's way too simple. Um, but the shades and layers of gray are so complicated, I think, for anybody. And for one person to try, it really forces you to confront your own drawbacks, because I know that there are probably a lot of things that I believe, and my moral framework is probably reprehensible to many, many people, and vice versa, you know? And how do you make standards that can apply across society when you have such differences in people's morality, right?
Yeah.
So that's the thing about a conversation like this, is that you kind of have to put aside your own personal moral quandary and try to think of what could the best rules be for everybody. And when that includes non-humans or uh, non-biological humans, that conversation gets infinitely more difficult. And that's why I think these are conversations that are great to have, because you
They're
can
banging on our door apart from anything
they're
else.
exactly they're questions we have to answer at some point. People are talking about this, but it's in no ways fleshed out. And when you're talking about something that's not a biological human, you'll have way, way much more of a diversity of opinion than you would about humans, right? There's
Yeah.
huge debates about human life, and what humans deserve and what humans need, and then you throw something else into the mix, and that makes it that much more complicated. You just have to look at how, like we've been talking about, people treat animals. Even within that, there's an infinite level of variations and moral frameworks. You know, you have people who think every living thing has equal rights, and that would never be applicable in a society. And then you have people who are just like, humans are the only things that matter, and everybody, there's no drawbacks. You can rape and murder 100 cows and dogs and cats and whatever, and you can go and you can stab a whale in the eye and eat it for dinner and whatever, and there's no consequences. Those are the people on the other end of the spectrum, and most people are somewhere in that middle, and we have to make decisions that work for everyone. So it's tough. It is.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I enjoy these kinds of conversations too. I'm gonna give us a 5 minute warning here.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah. it's I don't know. It's one of those ones that I think if you went off and you thought about it in depth every day for the next 30 days, you'd be no further along than you actually are right now. Um,
and the
it's
problem is it's always changing. We don't know what
yeah,
it's
it
going to
is.
look
Yeah,
like.
yeah. At the
That's what
same
makes it so
time,
hard.
like having talked about it for over an hour and a half,
Yeah, a long time.
um, I kind of want to give some sort of semi-definitive answer. I know I couldn't give a
Right.
definitive answer,
Right.
but I would really like to
Okay.
be
Yeah.
okay after
So let's
2 hours of your
share.
time.
Let's get as close to where we think we are um, on this. And I'd like to, if you want, you can go first.
Well, I would entirely put more weight. Like, okay, there's
So what does your scale look like?
I'm pulled a lot more towards consciousness of mind.
Give us a percentage.
Oh, that no, that's the part that you're not getting. I don't think I could do that.
Yeah.
But like, okay, like if I can give an example and maybe work from there. If For anybody who feels um, that it should be the other way, I'm going to give an argument, and that's as good as I can do, I think.
Do it.
So we'll say take any loved one, and something terrible happens to them, and you have a choice between transferring their consciousness into a computer or having their body, which will eat and shit and wander around the place like a fucking idiot, like a clown. Um, which are you going to choose? Like, almost, I would wager that almost everybody is going to choose their consciousness through a machine. Um,
Yeah. Absolutely.
well, unless there's some fierce fucking shallow people out there, which maybe there is, but I would wager that at least 90% of people are going to agree with me on that particular argument. Even if they disagree with me as an overall rule or an overall principle, I think that they'll agree with me on that one. And for that reason, I would say that consciousness of mind is more important.
There. Yeah. Yeah. What would you do? So that's what you would do.
Yeah.
Personally, for me, life doesn't, the value of life is in being lived. There's no inherent greater value or less value in one form of life than another form of life to me. At the same time, a life of a non-biological creature that has uh, the same brain buildup, the same brain composition, would be basically indistinguishable from biological life. And so, for me, it's all a drop in the same bucket. For me, there's not even a value scale I can put on it, because to me it's all different variations of the same thing. Life just is. And uh, to pro- I couldn't put a weight on towards towards one side or another. And I'm sure there's a more eloquent way of saying that, but that's kind of how I'm feeling right now.
So you think that all aspects of, we'll say your, uh, we'll say Nikita,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So her personality and the way she kind of whatever shakes her hand when she's making a point, all those different things are just as interrelated. And if you take one away, then you take another one away, or something like that.
it's
Like,
it's
say you diminish another one. I mean, sorry.
it's more that the life does not have value in itself. So like, um, our
I
life
actually agree with that.
our life has value in how we experience it, but externally that doesn't mean anything, you know so it
Yeah.
doesn't matter whether you're a biological human or a non-biological human. That experience is all you have of life, because we don't know if any of this is even real. And so the way that we experience life is the only way that we get it. And if one thing experiences it the same way as the other, then what's the difference? And maybe that's a better way of saying what I was trying to say before.
You're the center of your own universe.
You really are. All right, but that is my time. All right. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, John, as always. And thank you to anyone who's been listening. This has been one of my favorites so far of our conversations. And I really
Really? I liked it, but I struggled so much.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I think we're gonna go down this road for at least one more and see how we feel about it. And and yeah, so we've really enjoyed.
We might increase the blend of conversations.
Yes, yeah.
Rather than focusing on current affairs or philosophy, we'll try to be a bit
mix
more
and match more. We'll find the right ratio, but we'll get there, guys. But yeah, thanks so much for listening in, guys. As always, if you have any questions, please let us know, and we'd love to hear your take on what we're talking about. And if you think that we're talking shit, we'd love to hear it, and we'd love to hear.
Oh yeah, by all means, if you think we're talking shit, just slander the hell out of us.
Yeah, slander us.
That's okay.
Be your worst
self. Okay too.
Be your worst self on the internet towards us.
Yeah, because if you're not your worst self on the internet, you're your worst self in real life.
And that's too depressing. All right. Thank you, everyone. And we're going to sign off right here. We'll see you soon. Take care.
Bye.